Good evening, everyone. I'm Dhwani Mehta, a co-founder of the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you to our webinar this evening to discuss a report that's been collaboratively authored by the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, the Ekta Foundation, the Prajahita Foundation, the Association of People with Disability, and the Rural Development Trust. The report studies the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on exclusions as far as education for children with disabilities is concerned. And I'm going to let my colleagues speak to you in a little more detail about what went into this report and what our key conclusions have been. But I thought I'd begin the evening by giving you a brief introduction to Vidhi for those of you who may not be familiar with our work, as well as the work of the inclusive education program here more specifically. So Vidhi is an independent think tank that's based in both New Delhi and in Bangalore, and it does independent legal research to help make better laws and to improve governance for the public good. We work with central and state governments as well as public institutions to inform policy making and to eventually convert that into the law. But we also carry out high quality, original, empirical research. And the inclusive education program at Vidhi is an example of the latter. So the work of this program is primarily research and advocacy based and is based on original ideas and areas where we think that there are legal and policy gaps. So the program in particular is supported by the Kotak Mahindra Bank, and its overarching aim is to identify and create awareness about legal and policy gaps in the implementation of inclusive education, which we understand more broadly to refer not just to the to education for children with disabilities, but for children from all kinds of vulnerable and disadvantaged groups within the country. So the program has its seeds in a couple of writ petitions that were conceptualized by my former colleagues, Pallavi Mohan and Sanjana Srikumar, who had petitioned the Delhi High Court demanding the effective implementation of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, specifically in its application to education in schools. And the work was then carried forward by another set of colleagues, Priyanka Rao, Shreya Srivastav, and Tanushri Sarkar, who produced a report earlier this year that was titled Towards an Inclusive Education Framework in India. And this report, which we'd be happy to share with you, share as a link with you later on during the webinar, through a combination of legal and empirical research, highlighted the lack of harmony between the Right to Education Act and the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, and suggested amendments to bring the two, to make the two more harmonious and more effectively implement the right to inclusive education. I'm delighted that we now have a new team on board, my colleagues Nisha Vednekar, Pooja Pandey, and Naina Seth, all of whom are carrying forward the vision of this program really admirably. As I mentioned, the scope of the program is wider than just looking at the impact of inclusive education for children with disabilities. So we're also looking for ideas and collaborations from other groups and people like you who've joined the webinar today to think about ways in which we could work on research and policy projects that that help us ensure that the right to education is fully realized for children from all kinds of vulnerable groups. Now, this year has brought its own unique challenges. We've also had to pivot our research program to account for the enormous exclusionary challenges that have been posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we began this year with looking at ways in which digital education, which has obviously been one of the buzzwords of this year, we looked at what were the legal and policy reforms that were needed to make this more inclusive and accessible. So the organization Vidhi produces a briefing book each year that highlights 25 legal and governance challenges that the government of India could address. And one of those that we focused on this year was directed at the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment and contains some concrete recommendations on specific measures that might be taken to make digital education inclusive. Again, we'd be happy to share a link to that with you in later on in the chat box in the webinar as well. Now, lots of organizations have been doing stellar work in highlighting the effects and impacts of the pandemic, specifically on children. And we are very grateful to Mr. Rajiv Rajan of the Ekta Foundation, who approached us with the idea of doing an empirical research study that would add to the literature that was already burgeoning at the beginning of the year on what the impacts of the pandemic were as far as education for children with disabilities was concerned. And this is just the kind of work that we are hoping to do as an organization, to be able to collaborate with partners who have such a deep knowledge of the real life challenges with the implementation of both the Right to Education Act and the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. And this project that my colleagues will talk to you about in more detail today is really a culmination of that kind of productive advocacy. And we're really grateful to all the partner organizations with us today who worked with us to make this report a success. So I'm going to end by saying that, we hope that you find the findings of this report useful and instructive. We see the launch of this report really as the beginning of a conversation with all of you on more work that we could be doing to deepen our engagement in this space. We're looking to you for more research ideas. We're looking for ways in which we can improve advocacy, ways in which we can reach out to a wider section of people and really understand what the challenges with the implementation of inclusive education, both at this time and going forward, are likely to be. So we'd welcome suggestions from you. Please write into us. Please engage with us. We have a quarterly newsletter that the inclusive education team also sends out every quarter, highlighting some of the developments that have taken place both in India and abroad as far as inclusive education is concerned. And if you'd like to receive those, please do let us know and subscribe to them, and we'll add you to our mailing list. So really, I'm looking forward to a wonderful conversation between amongst Vidhi, partner organizations, and all of you who are attending today. And we hope that you will find this useful and help us do the work that we are doing in a better way. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Nisha now, who will introduce the other organizations who've been a part of this study as well and take you through the findings of this report. Thank you. Over to you, Nisha.
Sure. So actually, Pooja will be starting.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, yeah. That's fine. Thank you so much, Dhwani, for the initial introductions and everything. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the formal launch of the report, COVID-19 and Exclusion of Children with Disabilities in Education, presenting insights from 4 states. I am Pooja Pandey, and I work with the education team at Vidhi Center for Legal Policy as a project fellow. So I will be moderating the discussions today. Just before we get into the depth of the discussions, just a few housekeeping information and tips for you. As an agenda, we've kept the formal launch fairly simple, where my colleague Nisha and I will give the presentation about the objective, key finding, and recommendations of the report. The link of the report as well as the executive summaries will be shared with all of you in the chat boxes eventually. The executive summaries are available in English as well as in Hindi, Telugu, Tamil, Malayalam, and Kannada. This will be followed by a small experience sharing session between some select civil society organizations who were the partners and contributors to our study. The discussions and question and answer will happen at the end of the session, but feel free to drop in your questions in the chat box at any point of time during the entire discussion. Sign language interpretation will also be available throughout the session, and we'll also share the PPT with you in the chat box. So that's the housekeeping tip. I would also take a moment to formally introduce all the people who are right now with us here. First, we have Nisha Vernekar, who's the team lead education at Vidhi Center for Legal Policy. Hi, Nisha. We are also joined here by Rajiv Rajan, who's the founder of Ekta, that's a disability rights NGO working in Tamil Nadu, based out of Tamil Nadu. Welcome, Rajiv, to the discussion. We also have with us Suraj, who's the director of Prajahita Foundation. That's an NGO based out of Kerala, working in the space of disability as well. Welcome, Suraj. Preeti and Nitika are assisting us with the sign language interpretation today. Right now, we have Nitika with us. So thank you so much for joining, Nitika. Naina, our teammate, as well as Jasmeet, will be helping us with the overall coordination here through the VCLP account. Thank you for doing that, Naina and Jasmeet as well. So now, without any further delays, we can get into the presentation bit. I would request my colleagues to kindly share the PPT on screen as well as in the chat box as well. Thanks, Nisha. So as Dhwani was just mentioning that this is a study titled COVID-19 and Exclusion of Children with Disabilities in Education, and it has insights from 4 states. It's a collaborative study between 4 organizations, Vidhi, Ekta Prajahita Foundation, APD, and RDT. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, it's very important to understand the motivations for this study. The COVID pandemic has definitely brought a lot of disruptions in education throughout the country, and a lot of education surveys and education empirical researches are happening to understand what exactly these disruptions are. But a lot of these large-scale education surveys have also failed to capture the nuances of children with disabilities particularly. This is yet another example of inclusion being treated in silo and not as a part of education in general. So we thought that is where we found a research gap, and we thought that this is a study, or this is a point worth a deeper a deeper investigation. Even prior to the pandemic, there were many empirical researches like the State of Education report by UNESCO in 2019, which pointed really low enrollment rates of children with disabilities in education, as well as other studies found that even if the enrollment rates even if the enrollment is there, the retention rates still happen to be low for children with disability. As Dhwani was also mentioning, that Vidhi has been engaging with this space before, and we had a report called Towards a Framework for Inclusive Education, which gave us a little bit insight, a systematic insight into the governance and the experience of children with disabilities and education. So this was an automatically next step to go deeper and understand this better in the light of the pandemic. And lastly, we had this advantage of local CSO partners through Ekta, Prajahita, APD, and RDT, who had the advantage of scale and outreach within the communities. And that helped us in understanding the unique challenges of children with disabilities and its impact on their education and overall well-being in India. Next slide, please. As far as the methodologies goes, this was a study where the data was collected between September and October 2020. The sample was 164 children with disabilities and their parents, like the household, children in the household, at 50 teachers. Both these data of children, household, and teachers was collected through partner CSOs because they were embedded much better in the communities. But in addition to that, since we wanted to understand this issue a little more holistically and also look at the support systems and other networks in the lives of children with disability, we also happened to interview and talk to several NGOs, CSOs, and even government officials who directly engage with this issue from these 4 states of Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. So the interviews with the NGOs, CSOs, as well as the government officials were done either through Zoom meetings or through telephone calls, which is a norm these days, by the team at Vidhi itself. So yeah, next slide, please. A little about the sample description. 62% of the sample was rural. Median income was rupees 10,000, only 22% over median, predominantly from urban areas. 71% of the sample was Hindu. There was no substantial data on caste details as such in the sample. As far as access is concerned, 80% of the sample had TVs, 76% had smartphones, 17% had laptops, tablets, desktop. This 17% was predominantly from urban areas. 67% of the sample had access to internet. Good internet, bad internet, but some internet. 28% of the primary caregivers, which were the mother, had education below 5th grade, and only 22% of those mothers had education post 12th grade in our sample. Next slide, please. Okay, and as far as the education levels of the children themselves was concerned, so 40% of the children were between 9th to 10th grade. 18% of the children were between, students were between 11th to 12th grade. A small sample was studying beyond 12th standard, but they were in some form of education. So we did include them in the study and the sample. And 8% of children or students were either were between preschool to 5th grade. In addition to this, 54% of the students were female and 46% of the students were male in our sample. We also try to have a mix of the type of schooling they were enrolled in. So 13% of the students in our sample were enrolled in special schools. 7% were enrolled in schools run by NGOs. So our partner NGOs like RDT was also running their own special schools, and there were similar other NGOs, not particularly the partner ones, running their own special schools. So 7% were in school run by NGOs. 48% were in government schools and 33% in private school, both of these being mainstream, quote unquote. Next slide, please. Now coming to the issue particularly of education of students with disability and COVID-19. So we did base our study on some previous larger studies as well. Two very important of these studies was the one conducted by NGO Swabhiman, which was only focusing on children with disabilities and their education, and the other study was conducted this year itself by Azim Premji University, which was fairly broader, but it did account for the voices and experiences of children with disabilities through the teachers. The Swabhiman study found out that 60% of students with disability were able to attend online classes, but only regularly, and 43% were not able to access the classes at all. Similarly, the APU study, the Azim Premji University study, reported that 90% of the students with disability compared to 60% without disability were unable to participate in any online lessons. Now, the experiences and finding was somewhat similar to what we found in our sample as well. In our sample, only 62% students with disability were able to attend lessons regularly during the pandemic, compared to 92% prior. So there will be some slide eventually which will give us a better sense of the situation before the pandemic and after the pandemic, but just like some running figures here. Out of these, 33% were rarely or never able to understand lessons or complete assignments. So despite the classes happening in some cases, they were not necessarily able to grasp what was happening in the classes or were not able to complete those assignments. Our study on education of students with disability and COVID-19 was also an attempt to go a little beyond just education in general and look at the status of children with disabilities a little more holistically, which we'll talk about eventually in the later slides. And with this, I would also like to go into the key findings of the study and hand over the presentation to my colleague Nisha to take over.
Thank you, Pooja. Just in case I'm not audible at any time, please let me know.
Sure.
Yeah, so as Pooja said, I'll be covering some of the key findings. With this study, what we wanted to do was go a little bit beyond understanding, just how many students were not able to access education and get to the reason of why this was the case. So as Pooja mentioned, 62% of students with disability in our sample reported not being able to attend classes regularly. And this had come down from 92% who were attending school regularly prior to the pandemic. As many other education surveys during this time found, one of the primary reasons was the digital divide. So unavailability and unaffordability of devices, high-speed internet were some of the main reasons why students were not able to access lessons, where most schools were largely relying on online lessons during school closures. Another issue was even in households where there were devices, when there were many children, devices had to be shared within the household. So there wasn't a guarantee that every child would be able to attend lessons. Another important point was a lack of technological know-how among parents and students. So there was a difficulty in being able to navigate the different applications and different modes of instruction that were introduced to them during this time. Apart from this, students who were not able to access education, one entire group of that was students where schools had not started lessons for them. 18% of our sample reported that no classes were conducted for them at all during the pandemic period. And as Pooja mentioned, this survey was done about 5 to 6 months into the pandemic. So up till that point, no classes had been conducted at all. Even among those for whom classes were being conducted, inaccessibility of teaching and learning materials and the modes of instruction were reported. And over here, when we say inaccessibility, we're referring to disability-specific issues. So as we know, as most people in this webinar would know, the definition of inclusive education as given in the RPWD Act is a system of teaching and learning that is adapted to meet the learning needs of children with various different kinds of disabilities. However, what we found was essentially that this adaptation had not happened. So children with visual impairments found live online classes to be inaccessible, specifically where something like screen sharing was being used as a feature, or if teachers had recorded themselves writing something on a blackboard. These were the kind of things that were not accessible to a student with visual impairment. Students with visual impairments also spoke about not having access to their Braille books, Braille textbooks, not having other assistive devices that could help them during this time. Specific to children with hearing impairments, so during live lessons again, many teachers weren't able to have sign language interpreters or weren't signing themselves. Even where that was a possibility because of poor internet connectivity, there were lags in the feed and it wasn't possible for students to follow the lessons properly. Specifically, we found that with TV lessons, which many states had shifted to actually address this digital divide, there was, again, no subtitles provided and no sign language interpretation, as a result of which many children with hearing impairment could not access those lessons. Specific to students with learning disabilities and children with autism spectrum disorders, we found that they reported not being able to concentrate during online classes, and they were specifically affected by a disrupted routine in their daily lives. And children across the board missed one-on-one interaction and opportunities for social interaction with peers and their teachers. This was, again, especially true for students who were slightly older, who were maybe living independently in residential schools or hostels, and were sort of used to a certain kind of routine and were used to a certain level of interaction that they would have. Again, we highlight the case of students with hearing impairments because in many of their families, parents and their siblings don't sign. And as a result of this, they've been isolated in households without any meaningful communication for those many months. So all of these issues, specifically the lack of routine and the lack of social interaction, was reported to have increased stress levels of children and generally affected their mental health adversely. So as Pooja mentioned, we've also provided this slide over here, which talks about how the daily lives of children changed drastically during this period. So we have already spoken about educational classes. 92% were previously, prior to the pandemic, attending schools regularly. This fell to 67%. With respect to rehabilitation, 34% of our sample was regularly attending rehabilitation, which fell to 16% during the pandemic. 83% reported that prior to the pandemic, they enjoyed various opportunities for social interaction with peers, with friends, neighbors, teachers. This fell to 15%, specifically during the lockdown, which can be expected. And with respect to extracurricular activities, which included everything from sports to art, 70% were previously engaged in some form of extracurricular activities, which fell to 17% during the pandemic. So as can be expected, and as I already mentioned, all of these lack of access to all of these different kinds of opportunities was having an adverse impact on the students' mental health. As a secondary objective, what we also wanted to understand was the support systems of a child. So over here, we wanted to look at households and how they had fared during the pandemic and whether that had affected their ability to care and support the education of children. We also want to look at teachers, of course, as that has a direct impact on the kind of teaching that the children are receiving. And finally, we want to look at the work of CSOs in these 4 states, as well as relevant government departments and the initiatives they took during this time to address the needs of children with disabilities. So with respect to status of the household, we found 77% had lost jobs or income. 38% reported an increase in debt to cover just basic household expenses and household rent. 6% had actually lost or had to change their housing during the period. 2.4% actually also reported death of a breadwinner. 21% reported difficulty in accessing healthcare. This is also important to highlight as students with many different kinds of disabilities require regular medical health checkups. So not having access to this during, for almost a period of 6 months is definitely a concern. And 13% also reported having to reduce the number of meals that they were consuming per day. Apart from this, we also asked parents about their caregiving responsibilities within the household. As mentioned, many of the older students were living in hostels or residential schools prior to the pandemic and were forced to move back home once the pandemic hit. So 76% of the primary caregivers, which were largely mothers in our sample, reported that their caregiving responsibilities had increased a lot or substantially. And the 24%, most of them actually said that it has stayed the same, with very few saying that there was any decrease, which can be expected. Further, because of the economic and health shocks that I spoke about in the last slide, 90% of our sample actually said that they found themselves dependent on some form of support from either government or CSOs in their area during the course of the pandemic. And this was support for some of their most basic needs of nutrition and healthcare. With respect to teachers, so we also asked teachers, apart from the actual work that they were doing, about the kind of economic insecurities or economic shocks that they had also faced. Many of them reported delays in salary payments. Teachers on contracts, many of them had lost their contracts, and some of them were sort of in a limbo where contracts had not been renewed. There was also a double burden of teaching and non-teaching responsibilities reported by most teachers. Largely, this was where teachers had to take up a lot of the COVID-19 relief work. So for example, many of them were sort of charged with the task of distributing sanitation kits, distribution of dry rations to households, these kinds of things, which made up a large part of the work that they did during the pandemic. Teachers also reported struggling with online modes of instruction. So the new modes of instruction that they shifted to, whether it was using WhatsApp, whether it was live lessons on Zoom. Some of the issues were similar to what parents and children had reported, which was that they themselves did not have devices. They didn't have access to high-speed internet for conducting online classes. Many of them also faced difficulties in navigating these digital modes and they reported that basically a lack of training during this time was one of the reasons why they maybe found it difficult to manage online modes of education. Apart from this, many of teachers in the mainstream schools spoke about difficulty in understanding how to address the specific needs of students with disabilities in their classroom. Coming to the other support systems, so like we said, we spoke to CSOs in the 4 states and we spoke to government officials in the 4 states. So CSOs reported that on-ground operations were gravely hit during this period, specifically community outreach and any kind of on-ground efforts, such as many CSOs were running schools, were running rehabilitation centers. These were the worst affected. They also specifically highlighted certain kinds of activities that, because they were affected and could not happen, had led to a reversal in progress. So for example, with rehabilitation, centers being closed and children not being able to come to centers meant that they were concerned that the progress that they had made over many years would be reversed in just a couple of months. Similarly, with respect to early intervention centers, where say students are diagnosed with the different kinds of disabilities and given access to the kind of care they need. This kind of lack of access can actually adversely affect children and is maybe not reversible. The other thing that CSO spoke about was a reduced access to funds and a deprioritization of funds for education, with a lot of it being redirected towards relief work. With respect to government officials, again, we found similarly that there was a large focus on emergency needs, specifically health and nutrition, medical care to a certain extent, and away from education for children with disabilities. The various initiatives taken to address the issues of accessibility. In some states, governments were, for example, providing devices. Television lessons was, again, a response to students not having personal devices. In the case of Tamil Nadu, they took specific care to ensure that specific medicines required for persons with disabilities were made available at the most, ground level. Even things like disability pensions. The state of Andhra Pradesh had a doorstep program for delivery of disability pensions so that the actual delivery of it wasn't affected by the lockdown. And Kerala was one of the few states that actually had started a program of education specifically for persons with disabilities. So this was a very structured program with special educators, smaller groups, content that was made specifically for children with disabilities to address their specific needs. So basically, there was a lot of work going on the ground, and yet the experiences of parents and students suggest that a lot of their needs were still not being met. Based on this, we provide some key recommendations. What we've done over here is I've sort of shortened the actual recommendations we're presenting. The report has quite a few more. But some of the most urgent recommendations that we think need to happen. One is parents and students need to be consulted about the issues of accessibility and the other challenges that they have faced during this period. So this is extremely important and honestly a good time to do it, specifically because it's been 5 to 6 months. Parents with children across different disability categories have faced different kinds of challenges. And for the government to now come in and actually talk to them, consult with them, and understand how their approach to delivery of education can be adapted would be extremely helpful in addressing this issue over the next few months. Specifically, one of the things that had come up from CSO interviews, from interviews with parents and children, was an ask that schools be reopened as soon as possible. However, specifically for children with disabilities, we know that because of certain medical ailments that might also come along with what their disability is, they are the most vulnerable and at highest risk when they actually come back into schools. So given this, it's important to actually address how we can bring education to them, even in the medium term, rather than waiting for schools to reopen. So with respect to this, again, after consulting with parents and students about the issues they have faced, there's a need to actually systematically assess accessibility of materials used and adapt them through consultations with experts in the field. And when I say experts, I mean the CSOs who are well embedded into the communities, special educators who have been trained to teach students with different kinds of disabilities, national institutes that actually provide these courses. So these are the people that need to be consulted to understand how we can actually make the teaching and learning materials, adapt them so that they are accessible. So again, with respect to ensuring that these teaching and learning materials are available to students, the RTE Act does say that in schools, these assistive devices, appropriate teaching learning materials that are accessible to all students need to be provided. But the interpretation of this should not be limited to within the classroom, right? The availability of these teaching and learning materials and devices should be provided wherever education is being delivered. Which is why we have sort of highlighted this point again. Finally, there is also a need to train teachers on the use of education technologies and provide them with the appropriate support required to actually teach children with different disabilities. The reason that I've mentioned support here specifically is that not all teachers are trained to teach all children with different types of disabilities, but a system needs to be made where this is possible. So these are some of, like I said, the more actionable recommendations that we wanted to highlight. Our report does go into slightly more detail about the various experiences of students and children, as well as, how we can maybe address these challenges. Apart from this, one thing we did want to point out again is the importance of social security provisioning for the most vulnerable families. Um, as we said, children without access to devices are the ones who would struggle to access classes altogether. Children whose families are highly dependent on social security measures, when there is a failure in delivery of services, are the ones who will struggle the most to be able to support education, because that can't be the priority. As a final sort of call to action, we also wanted to point out that empirical research on children with disabilities and their status of education is not really something that gets done very often. And while this study is small, it's qualitative, there isn't, we can't really say that it's representative of what's going on in the entire country. But what's important is that we kind of call CSOs and NGOs who are embedded in these communities to maybe try and move towards creation of this evidence and documenting what they know on the field in a way that we can actually put it out more empirically and towards policy change. Similarly, for any education researchers, there are many education surveys conducted across assessments and every other aspect of education, but disability and children with disabilities are often left out of this. So again, for the creation of evidence, we think it's really important for this to be included in larger education surveys as well. Just as a final point before we conclude our presentation, we just wanted to highlight the case of North Karnataka. So we actually didn't sample students or children from North Karnataka, but we had a couple of CSOs who we interviewed who were working in this area. So the reason we bring up this region is because under Section 371J of the Constitution, this is basically, houses some of the most socioeconomically deprived districts in the entire country. And what we wanted to highlight with this is that during this pandemic, for the most vulnerable families, where where dependence on different services for basic health, nutrition, and food was so high, and where that delivery of services was disrupted or was not possible, we actually saw some of the worst outcomes. So in this case, a CSO spoke to us about how a child with disability who was fairly healthy had actually passed away because their parents had not been able to work for over 6 months. And they were forced to sort of make a decision about allocating food between their child with a disability and their child without. And of course, this is not a situation where we can judge a parent's choice or anything else. It's just to show that in the worst circumstances, the worst vulnerable families, this is how bad the situation could get, and it has already happened during this pandemic. So with that, I will hand it back to Pooja, and we can sort of conclude the presentation here. And yeah.
Thank you for the presentation, Nisha. As I told in the very beginning that we'll keep this event and the key findings really short in the interest of time. The report links have been shared in the chat box, requesting Naina to share the link once again here. With this, I'd like to move on to the second segment of our event, which is going to be a small experience sharing session by some selected CSO. In that, I would like to first invite Rajiv to talk about his experience of this entire context and his experience at Ekta and how they are dealing with this issue. Rajiv, over to you now. I think Rajiv is on mute.
Thank you, Pooja, for the introduction. I would like to request you to read out my message, please.
Sure. So Rajiv has already sent his message in writing to me. So I am going to read it on behalf of Rajiv for all of you here. Good evening. Thank you, Pooja, for being the backbone of the study. Thank you, Vidhi team. I know how difficult it is to coordinate with 4 different organizations. It is all the more difficult during the pandemic period. I would like to thank the other partner organizations Association of People with Disabilities, Bangalore, Rural Development Trust, Anantapur, Prajahita Foundation, Kozhikode, Kerala. The major question now is, how do we use the study? I think this is the first study of its kind in India. It is therefore a tool for raising awareness about the status of students with disability during this tough period. We need to make sure that our voices are heard in the corridors of power. This would not have been easy without proper statistics, and this study goes a long way in bringing out the ground realities about students with disabilities. Spreading of information is equally important to serve the purpose of the study. We need to work with other organizations, government and non-government, to see it to that the purpose of the study is met. I would like to conclude by sharing one of our experiences. Tamil Nadu government announced that the board examination is cancelled for the 10th standard. Later, they said that the private candidates will have to write the public examination for 10th grade. Now here's the catch for the candidates with disabilities. We study in special schools not out of choice but out of compulsion. Many of us are forced to go to special schools from 9th standard because mainstream schools run behind 100% results. Hence, most of them chuck out students with disabilities. Now, most of us in this gathering know that persons with disability lack immunity power in general, and during the COVID-19 times in particular. On top of this, for most of us, it is next to impossible to maintain COVID protocols for obvious reasons. Fast forwarding a long story, we didn't get justice from even the High Court of Madras, which said that the government will provide all the necessary protection without realizing that going out of the homes can be life-threatening for many of the candidates. If you really look at the real reason behind this, is that the special schools come under the Department of Social Welfare and not under the Department of School Education. Many of the special schools many of the people want their special schools to be under the Department of Social Welfare because of the grants they get. Are they at mistake? I don't believe so. It is the responsibility of the government to provide for the educational support and support these special schools through education department. The government must also see to it that inclusive education is not only on paper, but also in practice. I'm sure this is only a tip of the iceberg, and there are many more such stories in the country. Thank you for this opportunity, Rajiv.
Thank you, Pooja.
Thank you for sending this, Rajiv. I would now like to move on to Suraj from Prajahita Foundation, who was also one of the partners of the study, and he really worked hard with us to conceptualize and conduct the study. Over to you, Suraj, to share some of your experiences with this entire process and the outcomes of the study.
Okay, thank you, Pooja, and good evening, everyone. So to say about my experience, I just want to start with saying, so usually persons with disabilities are known for invisible community, and the movement which they carry out has not been come to limelight. But COVID had a positive impact on that. So first of all, when before COVID, so we were trying to use technology for the education purpose and trying to also to ensure that persons with disability have accessibility in schools and colleges. So accessibility was one of our major advocacy part. But with the help of other organizations and even with government, it was very difficult in the pre-COVID scenario because they were saying what will be the cost-benefit ratio and how many persons with disability will be joining for the moment, and they were worrying about the economics rather than the impact that will be created. But due to this pandemic, one of the major important development happened in disability sector is creating more accessible content and knowledge. The information shared has becoming more accessible. So pre-COVID, if you had asked some organization whether they will be using sign language interpreter for their webinars, they will be amazed to ask, why should I have a sign language interpreter? But now there are most of the scenario sign language interpreters has been part of the webinars. So that is one of the major change I can just see in see during this period. And major challenge, so if you just see in the constraints for the children with disability and their parent, was more of buying a new telephone, buying a new gadget, and using it. How to use was a difficult task for local people with socially and economically backward community. So what we were doing in the ground was connecting college students to reach out to the children with disability and parents and teach them how to use mobile phones, how to use Zoom, how to use G Suite and other Google Meet and all. So we were trying, and the major shift which happened, like teachers was not prepared for online classes, students were not having mobile phones. So how we bridge that gap was all the CSO community and also the teachers. So if you just see the Kerala scenario, Kudumbasri self-help group or Kudumbasri played a major role in ensuring all the person with disability gets mobile if they cannot afford it. And they were also reaching out to all children with disabilities home just to check whether they are doing better in their education, whether they need any support for their whether they are doing whether they need any support. So Kudumbasri had in Kerala. Kudumbasri played a major role to bridge the gap, digital divide, and also the education divide. So that was one of the major like one better thing which we saw in Kerala. And we were also, the major concern for the teachers in the beginning was how to like usually the next if you just see during June month and July when the academic year started, they were having a lot of troubles with connecting to internet. They were not able to get each individuals into Google Meet. So this was this was my major time consuming problem. For half an hour of session, they have to call each 30 students in the class and just check whether they are joining or not. So this became a bigger hurdle for teacher, and that was so through we used other technology like WhatsApp and other social media platform to try to address it, but still many parents were more keen to take the telephone and just check it. So that was, and also for children with disability, the degree of disability when if they are having severe disability, it was difficult for them to access the technology. And one major thing is like the purpose of education is to bring the learnings to action. So they were not able to do it through virtual education. So how to use the knowledge which they learned to practice. So this is not just for children with disability, for other children too. So we may have to like think over it, how to use this purpose of learning into action through our like as a future plan. And one major challenge which we as an organization and other organization is facing is to how we can teach children with intellectual disability. They are like we in the initial stages using a Zoom call and meeting their friends was very happy. It was a happy moment for children. Now it became a restless moment. So they are not able to enjoy the fun which happened in the earlier period. And we know that it's been 8 months at home. So now we are seeing a lot of behavioral problems among children with disabilities. So how to manage that? That's the next step forward for us. And also about many parents are having jobs, and for online learning, all are dependent on parents. So either they have to focus on economy, or either they have to focus on the children's study. And we saw a lot of parents taking a break, like children are stopping their education for the year and they are planning to do it for next year. So that's a point, and that's where we thought of doing an home-based education program for children with disability will be mentored by a fellow who is a postgrad student. So we started a program called UDAN, where children with disability being taught by the nearby postgrad student. So it will be more like reaching out to your neighborhood friend who teach your children, but they can also take care of. They can also teach, and they'll get a certification. So that's how we are trying to bridge the gap. Yeah, and these were things which I thought I'll share with you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Suraj. These were very helpful. And these were some of the innovative practices that Nisha was also mentioning about during her presentation. So CSOs, even despite so many difficulties, they've been able to make the best out of the situation in some way or the other. We have accounted for some of these voices in the report. We only interviewed 10 of them. I'm sure there are many more to it. We were fortunate enough to also have Ravi with us from the Fourth Way Foundation. So the North Karnataka study, which the North Karnataka case, which Nisha was just mentioning about, Ravi was the one and the team at Fourth Way Foundation to apprise us with all of that. So I will now ask Ravi to sort of add to it, talk about the issue, whichever way he likes. Over to you, Ravi.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We at Fourth Way Foundation, we actually started our campaign at two levels. We have what is known as school readiness program, because in the government system, before the child enters a regular school, he is prepared to include, he is prepared mentally, physically in the school environment. So before a regular school, a child joins a regular school, he is enrolled in something known as the school readiness program, which is handled by Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. In fact, actually children with disabilities, there are two levels of programs for the education. One is for the special schools, that is for the school for the blind, school for the mentally retarded, etc. And the government's Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan's campaign, inclusive education. While the special schools, they are doing some great work, but they are limited. A special school will be limited by the scope of their enrollment. While we at Fourth Wave, we were focusing on the government school system, and as a part of it, we set up 4 school readiness program, working along with the government as a model to see that this model can be replicated across the state. And whole of Karnataka, there are various levels of work, but the Hyderabad Karnataka, that comes in the north part of Karnataka, that is very, very marginalized in terms of access, in terms of, that is by the government itself. It has been marked as a backward region. And so they have set up some special programs and all. And we have got, in fact, there is got around 4 or 5 districts, and we have set up in a place called as, in a district called as Koppal, and in the Gangavati Taluka. Although this Gangavati Taluka is a cross between bordering Andhra as well as Karnataka. And basically, we focus on the government schools. So the marginalized sections, so either in a city, it'll be there are lots of rice mills in Gangavati. So it's either the rice mill workers' children or the agriculture workers' children. So we have got 2 SRP centers, school readiness program centers, one in Gangavati city, and then one in a nearby village known as Malapur. Our teacher, they take what they have identified. We have got 4 centers. One comes in Dharwad district, which is a more developed area. The other is Hyderabad, Karnataka. And our teachers are regular in touch with these children. We ensure that a child is connected through a mobile, so that our teacher, we have divided our children. For each teacher, we have assigned 20 children. So their responsibility is to check out what are the programs, how is the child bearing, developing, what's the learning of the child. They'll also try to manage it through phone teaching. And we also will do some, because cultural activity, that is one very, very integral tool which we used to follow. So we have got a regular trained dance teacher who will do his activity through the phone and ensure that the parents will also try to make that physical activity via their children. That is one thing what we have done. At the same time, we have also worked with the government departments. We have had very successful three webinars, state level. In fact, state level webinars. People from abroad also have been a part of it. So that this is a webinar to see that all players, NGOs, government departments, education department, the disability department, and the local parents also, the health department, they come and they share their experience. So, and the parents also, it's an open source of thing. So the parents can also ask the question about specific issues what they're facing. The teachers also get a handle about how do they teach more ahead. And that is also can be made available through online. We have got recorded all the videos. We would really be, in fact, all these days, the schools were not functioning. Right now, in Karnataka, the government is talking about restarting the school from January 1st. That is going to be only for the 10th and the 12th. And for the high school, that's the 8th, 9th, 7th, 8th, 9th, they are also just having something, a campaign known as some other campaign, which is not really a regular school, but it is going to be limited only to 20 children in a classroom. And we, as a community, we see that the children with disabilities, Fourth Way Foundation, we as a NGO, we are working among ourselves. We are working with the community and all. But systemically, there are in our Karnataka, there are around, as per the government Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan data, there are around 80 to 90,000 children with special needs enrolled in government schools. And we are able to manage around 300 to 400. And other NGOs, other big NGOs, they do have some special schools which are doing excellent work. But the question is, are we touching the 80,000 children with special needs who are enrolled in schools? That we need to go miles to go before we really can say that we are going back. But as of last week or a couple of weeks ago, I have seen that the government has also restarted the physiotherapy that we do have. I mean, I do not know how effective it has been all the state level, but in the places we work, they have recontinued the physiotherapy, because along with nourishment, which again, the government has also been supplying the food, because they used to get at the schools, Bisi Uta, the government program, that has been suspended. But the government has also created systems to ensure that these children get the provisions at the homes. But how effective it has been, that we do have some issues about that. Another one very, very important thing was physiotherapy, speech therapy, etc. therapies. That was paused for the last 6 months or something. Last month, I can see that the places where we are working in, the districts where we are working in, they have started the physiotherapy and etc. therapies. But how is it? How do all the children with disabilities fare across the state? I wouldn't venture to comment on that. But so that's what we are making up some progress. Yes, but it is miles to go before we can say that a genuine stage where before the pandemic started, how the children, because before the pandemic started, we had a system because the children were all identified from the Gram Panchayat. They were also identified and they used to go without any break. But now that's a great disruption. And uh, 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 we need to follow up with the various systems because we've got a very effective education department, the disability department, all together, and all the NGOs all have to come together to see that, to ensure that the children with disabilities are back into school after this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ravi. That was really, really helpful. We do not have any other insights from any particular speaker, so to speak. So we can now move on probably to the discussions bit in Q&A sections. As I was requesting all of you before as well, if you have any questions, please type that in the Q&A box. Please avoid typing in the chat box, type those questions in the Q&A box. We do have some questions coming in here on the chat box as well. One of the questions asked about how did we exactly conduct the study during a pandemic, and already the VCLP team has responded to it. We were mostly using telephonic interviews and where the partner CSOs were there, and if they were in touch with the parents and the household face to face, they were visiting them. That was not the preferred method, of course, due to the pandemic, but that was happening. We also did organize a small training for all the volunteers and the CSOs centrally to ensure that the ethics and the other protocols of research methodologies are duly adhered to during a pandemic as well. If you want to know a little bit more about it, we can always chat about that later after the webinar as well. Nisha, do you want to take any of the questions up, or is there anything you want to add to this?
No, I think, yeah, I think we just go through the questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
The most recent one also says, what systems have been created by the government? Could you tell us a bit about that, please? Where can we get more details about this? This is from Shashank Avasti. So this is maybe where the scheme compilation bit might come as well. So maybe
yeah. So, I mean, in terms of, firstly, thank you for your question, Shashank. So in terms of systems created by the government, what we tried to do was understand the different departments of the government that actually play some role in delivery of services for students with disabilities. Because our outlook was towards the education provisioning angle, we were sort of focusing on education first. So who delivers education, or who is responsible for delivering education for students with disabilities? And then what are the other sort of allied services and who delivers them? So the people that we spoke to in our report were largely people, like disability commissioners or faculty of national institutes, and then CSOs, to understand this entire process. And we mentioned some of the kind of initiatives that were done that they spoke to us about. As we said, a large part of it we found was not directed towards education directly. It was about, emergency medical care. It was about provision of rations and nutrition. These were the kind of systems that were happening during COVID. Having said that, across all these 4 states that we studied, there is a large list of schemes that the government has already put in place. This is, to a large part having to do with access to education, but also different kinds of cash transfers to incentivize children to come into schools, primarily mainstream schools. So everything from, of course, your midday meals, provision of assistive devices free of cost, trying to ensure that things like uniforms and other sort of out-of-pocket expenditures are minimized. All of these kinds of things exist. In our report, we've covered some of the more COVID-specific guidelines, but in the process of doing this research, we'd actually managed to compile schemes that the state governments already have in place for these 4 states. So if that's something that you'd be interested in, we would actually be putting it up and making it open access very soon, but we can share it with you separately over email as well in the meantime.
I hope that answers your question, Shashank, and if we understood that correctly. So there is another question by Richa Bhutani where she asked, was the respondent from across disabilities? Yes, they were. The details are available in the main report. The link is shared, so you can probably have a look there. Nena, are there any other questions which we need to take up? There's a question by Srinivas Murthy asking, could the panelists share positive approaches adopted by parents and teachers to reach out during the pandemic? So, I don't know. Can you clarify this question? The parents to reach out, the schools, or how did we reach out to the parents and teachers?
Yeah, so maybe if you could just comment in the chat box itself and clarify that question, that would be good. And we can move on to some of the other ones.
If can I just add to that, please? Okay, our experience was the parents were very interested stakeholders for the education of children with disabilities, because under the pandemic, with the government rules and all, the children with disabilities were classified as vulnerable categories, and so they were not allowed to enter any school, anything. So we used the parents, we used to interact with the parents. Even our teachers could not go and teach them at home. So we used to teach the parents, and the parents used to do the activities and the learning, especially the mothers. I really should salute the mothers because they walked an extra mile. The fathers, yes, but the mothers, they learned they learned how to handle a mobile and video record their children, because one of our tasks was we wanted wanted to look at how the child was functioning, and the mother used to video record the child, the activity which we used to teach them, and that was a learning that we are trying to do. We also did that. That's for your information.
Thanks a lot, Ravi. I think this answers the question well. There is also a question by Sonu asking how many of the team members of yours were at the ground while the pandemic relief work? And in addition to this, other than collection of certain sample info, was your team involved in any kind of urgent relief work? This we can definitely say with a lot of surety for our partner organizations like Rural Development Trust and APD. They were definitely involved. In fact, Ekta and Prajahita as well. All the 4 organizations were actively involved in the relief work as well. If this answers your question. Richa has a follow-up question. I'll read that, Nisha. It is difficult to communicate with the children with disability, especially those having speech and hearing impairment. How was the study able to address this? Was some sort of training being provided to the data collectors, or in this case, you interviewed the parents?
Yeah, so with this, because we also had children in our sample who were much younger, so the preschool to 5th grade age group, in those cases and cases where we were not able to communicate with the child directly, the parents were the ones who were primarily interviewed. Having said that, all of the older students, mostly they were able to actually either communicate directly with the surveyor or with their parents, and through that get their points across. Because Vidhi is a team, we are not trained ourselves in sign language or anything like this. So we were, of course, not in a position to provide training of that sort. The kind of training we provided, like Pooja mentioned, was largely on the actual survey tools and the process of data collection, ethical protocol, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Also, Srinivas has sort of clarified his question eventually. So he's like, crisis brings out innovation. Were there any surprising innovations? Some examples where fathers got more involved, neighbors helped more, etc., etc. We at AMC Bangalore also found it's useful to use videos as ways of communication. So yeah.
Right. So, I mean, definitely our CSOs who are on board right now can tell us a lot more about this. But just to give a few ideas, so one thing that has come across from our CSO interviews, some of the parents as well as studies like the ASAR study, which was nationally representative, is that where children didn't have devices, a lot of them were able to access that at least once a week through, say, neighbors or other relatives who lived close by. So these kinds of sort of positive things, people coming together to support the education of children, is definitely something that has been seen. With respect to innovative practices, again, through our conversations with CSOs, some of the things that we heard of that we thought was extremely innovative and extremely important to highlight, and maybe they can elaborate a little bit more. But one of the things, for example, that Fourth Way Foundation had spoken about was actually doing a connectivity audit from the get-go. So this was basically talking to all of their parents, I mean, the, beneficiary parents that they had in their network, and sort of getting a sense of what devices they actually had access to, what kind of devices, what kind of screen, and based on that, adapting the materials that they would send out to them in those different formats, right? And that is really what at least in my head, I would think of as an inclusive system that actually adapts materials to the student's needs rather than asking the student to adapt to what's already out there. Some of the other things, again, in Karnataka, we heard about this Disability NGO Alliance, which again has existed prior to the pandemic. And there is a lot of sharing of best practices, a lot of sharing of information. So even something like that, bringing CSOs on board and hopefully actually sharing that information across state lines would also be something, that should be happening more and more. I think has started happening thanks to webinars like this. So now there's no sort of limit on who can join and where they can join from, but maybe something that should be happening more systematically as well. Pooja, if you have anything to add, or we can maybe ask.
Yeah, I think that covers everything, and the rest of the details are in the report itself. And also, Suraj just wanted to clarify to Richa's question that at least in case of Prajahita, the organization had in-house sign language interpreter who supported with the data collection. So definitely in Kerala that was the case. And I will also request Suraj and Rajiv to pitch in here as well. Please take the questions directly because you were a very important part of this entire process. Next, we have a question from Ankur Madan ma'am. Was there any evidence of informal, creative, positive practices adopted by the teachers to engage the children with disability despite the limitations? I can definitely think of Tamil Nadu and some of the teachers from Tamil Nadu at the top of my head. Other than involving children, also they were very proactively involving the parents as well. So they were also rotating the responsibility amongst parents for peer tutoring. So the parent can peer tutor the parent, and the parent takes the class with the other children. So that also builds a network amongst the parent as well. That is one of the examples. If Nisha can think of others, and maybe Suraj and Rajiv as well, please pitch in here as well. So yeah.
One of the major, yeah.
Yeah. I'll come in next. You go ahead, Suraj.
Okay, thank you. So major thing which we saw is like having a music competition and a fancy dress competition, which is happening online. It was one of the creative activity. For example, we did in Kerala they did a fancy dress competition with children with intellectual disability went to nearby farm and they had their farmer look and they took a picture and uploaded it. So similarly, in-house that activity happened. That was something which we thought is interesting. Apart from that, one of the ways like more is WhatsApp communication, and the parents themselves created WhatsApp group, and they were discussing among parents how to better it. And even some schools they also try to have cooking classes along with their class. So like because children were trying new dishes and other things, so that also brought some interaction.
Rajiv, please, you can go next.
Yeah. 1 minute. basically, we were focusing on students with developmental disability. So we did not face any problem with sign language. Actually, people who did the survey never got back to us saying that they had this problem. So you want to interpret that?
Rajiv Mehta, could you say it again once?
No, actually, we were focusing on people with developmental
Development
disability.
disabilities. Yeah.
So, actually, that's what I know. We did this language problem. As far as co-curricular activities, we were not able to tell anything much because we are basically an advocacy organization. So we do not direct work with the students.
Sure, Rajiv. So basically, like just to clarify this to everybody, the Tamil Nadu sample and the children with disability were mostly children with developmental disabilities. So the sign language interpretation problem did not necessarily come up there. And as far as the co-curricular activities go, Ekta in particular was not able to intervene much because it's an advocacy-based organization, which mostly like deals a lot with government bodies and the kind of things I've just spoke about on behalf of Rajiv. So yeah, I hope this covers what you wanted to talk about, Rajiv.
I don't think I have any points. Anything more to add?
Sure.
Yeah, just
any questions? Any other questions? I am ready to take them.
sure.
Sure.
Yeah, so just to conclude that question, I think this is something that even across different education surveys, there's sort of limited documentation of the actual practices that teachers have taken, and definitely something that should be the focus of the next set of research. With us, we did have a limitation because we could only have sort of more structured surveys with the teachers. We weren't able to actually do a more in-depth conversation where we might be able to capture this kind of information, but definitely something we'd be so happy to actually try and do, next time around or going forward. There is another question that says, can you share the difference in support received from children going to government and private schools? So with respect to this, like we said, we did, have respondents from both government and private schools. We weren't able to capture specifically things like, did they get access to midday meals? Did they get this and that? Some of the things that did come up, which are, of course, starkly different, was private schools where parents, we had two respondents like this, private schools where the parents had not actually paid the school fees. They were actually disallowed from attending lessons. So their kids hadn't received any classes because they hadn't paid the fees. So there were these kinds of differences.
And teachers and their workload as well. So
exactly.
Like not necessarily in relief work and yeah.
Yeah, so with respect to exactly Pooja's point, so when we spoke to teachers from government schools, they specifically spoke about this additional burden of non-teaching activities, which was largely COVID relief work, as we mentioned earlier. And for most part, private schools weren't doing that, or at least weren't being asked to do that. If they were doing it, it was more like on a voluntary basis. So that as well, in terms of the additional work burden, was something that we definitely saw as being very different between the two.
There's another question here from Madhu Grover. And the question is, as the focus was education, did you also find that finance, health, and food was more pressing need and education of normal child was priority and person with disability was left behind? Anything MSJE can do for it for equity?
Right. So definitely, through conversations with CSOs and with government initiatives itself, it was very clear that the focus had to be on health, it had to be on nutrition, and there was no option but to sort of put education aside for the moment, right? And again, I think it was an NGO, I mean, a CSO from Andhra Pradesh that said that, you know, in their entire life of working in development, we never thought that we'd come back to the problem of hunger the way we did during this pandemic. So given that, it makes complete sense that there was a focus on everything else, on emergency needs and a deprioritization of education. Even from the perspective of parents, that was definitely the case. When there's a loss of job, you have all your children at home. I mean, there's, you know, food insecurity, there's income insecurity. Like we said, some people had to leave their houses, shift to new houses. All of these additional stresses and burdens were there. And really what happened during the pandemic is that the caregiver burden was moved from the state into the house, even though the house was so much more dependent on the government during this time. So for those 4 months or 3 months where there was a complete lockdown, there is no service delivery, and the household essentially had to do everything by themselves. So during that time, definitely the priority is not going to be on education. And as we showed you in the case of North Karnataka, in the worst circumstances, there was, you know, situations where parents were forced to allocate resources between their two children. In less dire circumstances, we found similar examples. So we had examples of parents saying, you know, my older daughter, she's not differently abled. She's, you know, almost going into her board exam classes, things like that. So yes, her classes were given priority over my younger child who has a disability. So, you know, there is a deprioritization of education coming in that way as well. And we know from additional evidence outside that whether it's gender or disability or, you know, these kinds of intersections of disadvantage, there are going to be some students who will be prioritized when it comes to educational investments and keeping them in school. So we are likely to see more children drop out than before. So what Ravi sir was saying about finding a way to bring these children back to school, whether it's by giving them information about the kind of incentives that do exist or giving them additional incentives to come back into school. This is, you know, extremely important in the next stage. And actually, one of the recommendations that we do talk about is a targeted effort to identify the kids that are at high risk of dropping out. And there is enough evidence, there is enough literature over the last at least 10 years that tells us who these kids are going to be and which regions they're going to be in. So again, Kalyan Karnataka is a good example of that, right? 2013 state has this special status. So we know that they are at the highest risk of coming back to schools. Can we go there? Can we provide incentives? Can we ensure that their children will be safe? These are the things that we really need to be focusing on. Apart from this, I think there's also, I'm sorry, I'm speaking for a long time. Please, other people with points, please come in. But apart from this, I think there's also specifically the question of special educators or teachers being adequately trained to teach children with disabilities. I think this is also a question that needs a lot more attention. And we are, again, you know, just for general interest, Vidhi is trying to do a study on that as well, specifically on special educators and the kind of support that even they need to support children with disabilities. But we found that during COVID, that was one of the main issues, right? Teachers who are not trained to teach students with disabilities and who are not trained to use a cell phone, they are going to first try to use that cell phone and teach at least the 50 people in their class who don't have a disability before the maybe 2 that do. That is going to be how the priorities work. Yeah, so if anyone else would like to add to that, please.
I think that covers everything, at least from my side. Any other questions from any of the attendees?
An attendee had raised his hand. I'll just ask him to.
Okay.
Hello. Hello. Yeah. Javed, are you able to hear us?
Yes.
Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I'm from Jammu and Kashmir, and what I felt during the COVID and before COVID, from last since August 5, Jammu Kashmir has been under a large kind of conflict situation, and thereafter lockdown started in March, and children with disabilities were
Javed,
totally out.
Javed, we're not able to hear you much. There is some background noise, so
Maybe Javed can just type his question. Just type.
yeah,
Yeah, that will be better actually.
that may be better because the interpreter is also finding some issues in interpreting the question.
Javed, can you
Is it okay if
type
yeah?
the
Is it
question?
okay if you could yeah?
No, I can't. I can't. Sorry. I just listening lots of voice.
Yes, yes. Javed, is it okay if, for you to type the question?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
In the meantime, if anybody else has any question, please feel free to type those.
Well, I would like to know, because a lot of information, lot of material is that right now what you have done. So will this be uploaded, or as webinar, will it be stored or something? Can we access it?
Yeah, absolutely, sir. So we have recorded this webinar. It's also streaming live, and we will be uploading this on Vidhi's YouTube channel. And a shorter version will also be sent out. So.
Thank you very much, please.
Of course.
Thanks, Ravi.
Yeah, I think the questions come. So Javed says, in Jammu and Kashmir, children with disabilities are completely detached from the educational and rehabilitation processes. I think he's still typing, so we'll just wait for that. Sorry, Javed. So in the meantime, while we're just waiting for Javed to put in his question, as we mentioned in response to someone else's questions earlier, we'd actually created a compilation of schemes in these 4 states. So I mean, we'll be putting it up on a microsite or something like that soon. So it will be open access, and we'll share it with everyone. We know that this kind of thing already exists out there, especially CSOs will have this information probably in the regional languages itself. Our compilation is in English, but again, for any researchers, anyone who maybe doesn't have access to this, if you would find this useful, you know, please use it. We've tried to be as comprehensive as possible.
And we'll also leave our email IDs in the chat boxes if you have any follow-up questions and you were not able to type your questions during the session. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we are not able to get his question. He hasn't completed typing it. So there must be some sort of connectivity issue. So
yeah, it's basically that's me. So there's a lot of connectivity issues there.
I see. Okay. Okay, so Rajiv sir, would you suggest we wait, or maybe?
We just wait for 2 more minutes and then we can go ahead.
Yeah.
Sure, sir.
That makes sense.
Yeah, if there are any other questions in the meantime.
I think we can go ahead.
Okay, sir. We'll maybe connect with him later and see what that question was.
I'll do that. I'll do that and I'll get back to you all.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much. Okay.
Yeah.
So Pooja, would you like to?
Sure. So as far as the event goes and the formal launch and everything goes, this is it from our side. Of course, we'd love to follow up and love to be in touch with many of you. As Mani was mentioning earlier as well, that we do have multiple engagements like the newsletter, and we are always open for better ideas and collaboration. So do write to us. I'm just dropping in the email IDs of Nisha and mine in the chat box. So do reach out to us if you have any other ideas or suggestions. Please read the report if you have any inputs or corrections to make in the report. Like somebody in the chat box was pointing out that we should have you use the term co-curriculars as opposed to extracurricular. I think that's a very valuable suggestion. So if you have any other suggestions like those, please send it out to us. And that's it as the event goes. And I think we're good to close the event then. What do you think, Nisha? Anything from your side?
No, nothing from my
Javed,
side. But, yeah.
Javed has posted his question if we'd like to take that up.
Okay, so maybe we'll just take this and then we will close the event.
Sure.
Sorry for the back and forth, everyone. Okay, so Javed says, in Jammu and Kashmir, children with disabilities are completely detached from the educational rehabilitation processes. Our children face lack of special educators. Children with disabilities belonging to economically poor households have no Android phones due to communication barrier. Deaf and mute children are away from teleclasses. Mental disabled children are not included in the development process. The school education department has no policy for inclusive education. During COVID, the special needs were not catered. Even high support like diapers and catheters were not available, including psychiatric medicine. Okay. Okay. So 2G. Okay. So I think he's sort of telling us a little bit more about his experiences with this, which is why we were trying to not put it in the Q&A. Yeah. Got it. Got it. Okay. I mean, thank you so much, Javed, for explaining all of this. And I wish the connectivity wasn't so bad, so we could have actually heard from you. But yeah, as you say, these are some of the problems that we see in some of the worst affected areas, the most marginalized communities. These are the kind of problems that we have found as well, and that need to be given due attention. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe with that, if we have no more other questions.
I think that's it from our side. We would then, like as promised, we'll keep this short. It's been 1.5 hours already, and we'd like to be in touch with many of you. So do write to us. We've kept our email IDs. The reports again are available on the website. So do read them, do comment, do write to us. And thank you so much for all your time. Once again, special mention to Preeti and Nitika for helping us with the sign language interpretation. Thank you, Ravi, Suraj, and Rajiv for joining. And thanks a lot, Naina and Jasmeet, for all the back-end overall coordination and operation. It wasn't possible without you guys. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, all of you. Merry Christmas, well in advance. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.